Hi, Warren here. Before roasting this coffee, I wanted to show something interesting. On the left is a Colombian Swiss Water Process decaffeinated coffee, and on the right is a Colombian regional Jess, a regular wash Colombian coffee from Arcadia Coffee. At first glance, they look similar, but if you look closely, you can usually see a difference. Decaffeinated coffee often starts slightly darker in colour, sometimes a little more matte. That's because the Swiss water process removes caffeine using water and filtration, and that process changes the internal structure of the beans. By comparison, a typical wash coffee, like the regional Jess, often appears lighter and more vibrant in its raw form. Those differences in raw coffee can sometimes translate into different behaviours during roasting. Decaf can occasionally roast a little differently. Sometimes it absorbs heat differently, sometimes first crack can be quieter. So rather than forcing a strict profile, the goal of this roast is simply to observe how the coffee behaves. This is roast 41 in the Coffee One Roast at a Time project, and it's my first reference roast of a Swiss water process decaf on the Gene Café CBR-301. A couple of people following the project have also been experimenting with their own roasts. One is currently working quite a bit with decaf, and another has roasted a very large number of batches over the years. Interestingly, both of them independently mention something I've also been seeing, that the Gene Café can behave quite differently depending on whether the roast starts from a cold machine or a warm machine. So this roast is intentionally done as a cold start, which is how the machine is designed to be used, and it helps keep the observations consistent with the rest of the dataset. Early in the roast, we're mostly watching the drying phase. Across many roasts, I've noticed that when the Gene Café display approaches around about 200 degrees, that often lines up with the point where the beans begin to change from green towards a yellow. At this stage, you often notice the aroma shifting as well. The smell typically moves towards hay or grassy notes, which is usually a sign that the drying phase is nearing completion. It's important to remember that the Gene Café measures environmental air temperature, not the temperature of the beans themselves. But even so, these points often appear consistently during roasting. Around the 200 degree mark, the beans are usually clearly yellowing. From here, the roast begins to move into the stage where browning reactions become more active. As the roast progresses, the beans begin to shift through lighter brown colours. This stage is often associated with Maillard reactions, where sugars and amino acids react to produce new aromas and colour changes. Across many roasts, I've noticed that when the Gene Café display reaches around about 230 degrees, the beans are usually clearly moving through the browning phase. At this point, the aroma often begin to resemble bread or toast. From here, the roast begins to accelerate toward full development. Colour changes become more obvious, and the aroma become deeper and more rounded. With decaf coffees, first crack can sometimes be quieter or less obvious, so visual observations become even more important. As the roast continues, the goal here is simply to reach a balanced medium to medium dark roast level. Not too light, not too dark, just a solid reference point for this coffee. Once the colour and aroma looked right, cooling was initiated. On the Gene Café, the moment cooling begins effectively defines the total roast time. After cooling, the beans are weighed. That allows us to calculate weight loss, which is one of the most useful objective measurements available to a home roaster. Weight loss helps confirm how much development occurred during the roast. So what does this roast tell us? First, the Gene Café behaved exactly as expected. The roast progressed through the same general stages that appear across many previous roasts. Second, the decaffeinated coffee roasted in a very predictable way. There were no unusual machine events and no surprises during the roast, and that's actually useful, because it suggests that the same observational framework used for regular coffee can work just as well for decaf. Of course, roasting is only the first part of the story. The real test is always the cup. So the next step is to let the coffee rest for a few days and then taste it, most likely as espresso, and see how this roast performs. This was roast 41, Colombia Swiss Water Process Decaf on the Gene Café CBR-301. And as always with this project, we're just learning one roast at a time. And if you do like this sort of content, a like and a subscribe would absolutely be fantastic and much appreciated. Thanks very much for watching.